Okay, I see us. Okay, here we go. Welcome, welcome. Okay, hi ladies. Sorry, we were having some technical difficulties. We were gonna post on our event page, but some reason that didn't work. I'm not a technical guru, or technically competent. So we're on BFJN's Facebook page now. So hopefully people will be able to find us here. And we're gonna get started. So welcome, Kathy, Lindsay, and Jess to our Uncomfortable Conversations, and welcome to everyone who's joining us on Facebook. So first I want to introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth. I will be talking, hopefully almost not at all, after this little introduction. I run the Boston Faith and Justice Network. We're an organization that seeks to challenge Christians around our ideas of understanding the world around us and how we're called to be agents of justice. And so in that role, and then just as someone who's been watching along with all of you, the things that have been going on in this country, starting with Ahmaud Arbery and to George Floyd, and thinking about what would my response be? What is my role in my community? And what's my role as the executive director of BFGN? What's my role as a mother? What's my role as a citizen? Considering all of these things, as I'm sure many of you have been. And I think I've engaged and unengaged in the work of racial justice on and off for years, decades even. But my privilege as a white woman is such that I could pick it up and put it down. And I'm not proud to say that, but that's the reality of my place in society. And so with this recent surge of people paying attention, people acting, I wanted to be part of real, lasting, and sustainable change. I wanted to think about how I could do that, and then how the Boston Faith and Justice Network could engage our community and help facilitate that for other people. So this conversation is born out of that desire. And so what I did was I called out my church ladies and I asked these three amazing women if they'd be willing to share their stories. And they graciously agreed. And so thank you guys for being here. And now I'm going to ask you guys if you would just really briefly introduce yourselves. Lindsay, would you start?
Yes. My name is Lindsay Colelli. I am a stay-at-home mom of three. And growing up in the South, I've experienced racism since I was about 10 years old, which is when we moved from a predominantly Black neighborhood and school to a predominantly white town and school in Jasper, Alabama. So we moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Jasper, Alabama. I was first called the N-word in 6th grade by a boy because I sat in the seat in front of him and I didn't know how to handle it. I got very upset, but didn't want to cause a scene being the new kid and all, and being one of the few Black kids in the classroom. So I didn't say anything. And I remember feeling angry with myself for not speaking up. And I remember feeling helpless. And this reaction continued as I experienced microaggressions and racism throughout primary and secondary education. And I don't want my kids to have that same experience of helplessness. I want them, their cousins, their peers, their school teachers, our communities, our circles, to be able to identify and address racism in a loving, informative, and effective way. And I want to empower them to always speak up and to stand up for what's right.
Thank you. Jess, would you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. My name's Jessica Lim. I was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago, and I came out to Boston for college and pretty much have lived here ever since. My husband and I have two daughters, 12 and 10. And I'm just honored to be here and to be able to kind of share my experience today. But I really didn't become passionate about issues of social justice until recent years. And my journey didn't really come from this selfless place of wanting justice for others, admittedly. For me, it started as kind of a rock bottom plead to God to free me from lies that I had believed about my own true worth and my identity and about him. And as he began to free me and show me kind of who I really am, my worth, my identity, and his love, I naturally began to see just his heart and his passion for social justice, because I saw the value and the worth in others. So I saw his heart for the oppressed, the marginalized, and the poor, and that's kind of what started me on this journey.
Okay, thank you. And Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy LaFlash. I'm sixth generation Hopkintonian, born and raised here in Massachusetts. Very white community, but I'm definitely a sinner saved by grace, that I realize each and every day I'm never too old to learn, to understand, to listen, and to change. I was born in the 60s. As a result of that, my mom often said I was born at the wrong time because I always had a cause or a movement that I was involved in. I guess that really hasn't changed over all of these years. And I'm really thankful for this opportunity to be on this panel tonight, to be involved in this very important discussion, and to see what God has planned for the roots of what the plants, the seeds that are planted tonight. So thank you for this opportunity.
All right, thank you. All right, well, let's dive into some of our questions. Lindsay, I'm going to start with you. Can you share with us a time where you've experienced racism in your life?
Yes. I was 17 and I was driving with my white classmate and a friend, and also co-captain of our cheer squad. It was after graduation. We were driving to UAB for the incoming cheerleading squad's camp. So we pulled up to a gas station. She went in to pay and I stepped out to pump. But before she could pay, the white attendant ran out and yelled, "Hey, you can't pump that gas." She can, but you can't. Christy was shocked and immediately said, "Well, we just won't be getting our gas from here." And so we left. Also, we lived in the city of a county that was filled with smaller rural towns, some of which were known to be racist. When we would play one town in particular, there would have to be massive security because guys from the other team would mime wrapping nooses around their necks to taunt the players and the Black members and the crowd. So you would have these groups of white guys and groups of Black guys trying to fight each other. I also remember getting on a plane from Boston to Colorado with my husband, who's Italian, and my in-laws. And I was also carrying in the Bjorn my daughter at the time, who was 14 months. I was boarding and they were scanning our tickets when the flight attendant or the attendant, who was a white female, said, "Ma'am, you can't board." I said to her, "Well, we're together. This is my husband and my family." But she repeated, "Ma'am, you cannot board." And my husband said, "Ma'am, this is my wife. This is our child." I was wearing her. And she said more firmly this time, "Ma'am, you cannot board." And although I was carrying her, and the reason for us boarding early with families with young children, I had to wait and until it was my zone to board. And I was infuriated, as any parent would be, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't cause a scene so that I could get on the plane with my family and to my destination. And then I want to share two more quick ones. This past January, I was standing at the bottom of my driveway, which is where the preschool bus comes to pick up my son. And a man in an off-white van came over the hill, and when he got in front of us, he slowed down to almost stopping when he saw us, and stared at my son and scowled. And it was so long that I had time to grab my son and pull him close to me, and then he slowly went down the street. This wasn't even that crazy of an instant, but all of a sudden I was filled with like panic because this guy knows where I live. I'm getting emotional right now just talking about it, but like, is he going to come back? Is he going to bring some of his friends? So that was just this January. So still, when I see like a band that's off white, I get a little nervous, and then lastly, one of my three younger brothers is also in an interracial marriage. He's married to a wonderful white woman, my sister-in-law, we call her. But her father still hasn't accepted my brother. They've been dating since 2011, married since 2014, and he won't acknowledge his granddaughters. So, yeah, those are just a few I wanted to share.
Well, thank you for sharing them. I just appreciate that kind of vulnerability, and I can understand and see that it's hard to recall some of that stuff, and it's honestly hard to hear. And I just want to pause here and say, I didn't say at the beginning, you might have questions as we go on, whether it's about their stories or just the panelists in general, or just some ideas that we're bringing up. I want to ask you guys, you can throw them into the comment section, and then we're going to try to leave some time at the end for some Q&A. So you can start to throw up questions if you have them. So Jess, now I'm going to put to you the same question. Can you share with us experiences you've had of racism and discrimination in your life?
Sure. Unlike Lindsay, I've never feared for my life for being a minority. I mean, hearing her share that story just breaks my heart. I fortunately have never experienced that. The racism that I frequently experience, aside from the racial slurs that are thrown at me, most of the time I feel like it's from a place of good intention. I often get asked, where are you from? And it's a very innocent question. And and as a kid, I'd answer very innocently, I'm from my hometown, I'm from the state, I'm from the Midwest. And those questions obviously those answers were obviously not the answers that were being sought, because once I answered with those answers, they would follow up with, no, but where are you from? And so I quickly realized that it gave me the feeling that I didn't belong, that I wasn't seen as someone who belonged here, despite being born and raised here and not knowing any other country other than the United States, that people's first reaction looking at me was that I was a foreigner. It's interesting, I had a Facebook memory pop up just a couple of months ago about an experience that happened to my family a few years ago when we were out eating dinner. A white woman approached our table. My girls were really little at the time, only 4 and 2. And the woman came up to my younger daughter and said, "You're so cute, what's your name?" And of course, being a 2-year-old, she just kind of gave her the stranger danger death stare. And so my older daughter replied for her and said, "Her name's Alexa." And the woman immediately looked at me and my husband and said, "She said that like a regular American. How long have you been here?" And I looked at her and I said, "Actually, we were all born here, and she's like, "Oh, that's wonderful. I just read in the paper that people from your country, where you're from, all want to come here for our education. But, the education where you're from is also very good. We're all people. We all have the same brains. We're all the same." And then she happily walked away. And I think she was really trying to engage us and not be a racist, especially with the addition of that, tagline saying, "We're all the same." But so her unintentional way of engaging with it was actually from this racist thinking that, anybody who isn't white can't really be from the United States. So her good intentions was actually racism, and it was actually quite hurtful to my family and I. I mean, I posted on Facebook because I almost thought it was comical, comical enough that I had to share because it seemed ridiculous, but this is often kind of the type of racism that I encounter, is just forever being seen as a foreigner. At that table sitting there that day, we had 2 generations of United States born citizens, and we were still asked that question. Or even when I told her that we were born here, she couldn't even receive that as truth and said, "Oh, I read people from your country come here." And so it just didn't even register because of the overall arching kind of mindset that she was operating from, which is that anyone who's not white can't possibly be from here.
Yeah. Thank you. Again, thanks for sharing that. Lindsay, I'm going to follow up with you. As a lot of us are members of faith communities and we're looking to our faith communities to address these issues now, whether we've been asking them to for a long time or just now as we're awakened to it, we're wanting them to be part of this and to lead and to teach. But I think in order to do that, as faith communities, we've got to address some of our past complicity in racial injustice in this country, in perpetuating some racism. And so do you have experiences within faith communities where you've experienced racism?
Yes, so both in predominantly Black and predominantly white churches. So I experienced it in a predominantly Black church when a speaker used an act of racism in the news to blame an entire race. And divisive measures only worsen the problem. And then I've also experienced at a predominantly white church, my ideas being shut down on the worship team because they seemed too gospel-y or unsuitable for the members in that particular congregation. Instead, as believers, we should be welcoming differences as a way of enhancing the worship experience and highlighting the fact that God made us all, including, not excluding our differences in his image. And in my opinion, we cannot fully love God until we fully love all of his children. I also remember being in a meeting and asking 3 questions to a white male leader. Each time the question wasn't received well. I started to wonder, was it the way that I was asking it? Was it my delivery? Was it the color of my skin? After the last question I asked was dismissed, an Asian woman, if you don't mind me saying, Jess, it was Jess who was there. She further clarified what I was asking, and to my surprise, he dismissed her as well. Then a white male leader clarified even more what I was asking, and finally he heard the question and answered it. And it was clear to me that at that moment, it was because I was a woman of color, or maybe even a woman. And this doesn't at all represent our church, but we have to remember that people are flawed, and we have to make it crystal clear, especially to those who are in leadership positions, that these actions only create division and push people away, neither of which are representative of Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And thank you for bringing up that concept of intersectionality too, where there's different groups of people that are discriminated against, right? And some people wear a lot of those identities, and that understanding how that can just layer that. So thank you for that. And Jess, I wanted to ask the same question to you about faith communities.
So I've been learning a lot about this, and actually I've been having my eyes opened up to this a lot. And I know when I say this, I know it might be hard to hear because it was hard for me to hear because I'm a part of that. I've been a part of the problem. And I think one thing that we need to kind of be aware of as the church in America, as we look into why we've been complicit or even admit our own complicity towards social justice, is kind of the theology that we've kind of taken on and have kind of lauded as superior, or kind of only focused on, zeroed in on. And I think if you are honest, it has been a white male theology. And in of itself, kind of like my example before, I think the intentions are good, but that doesn't make us immune to the harm that being so focused on one specific type of theology can be. Because one, if we really believe that we were all created in the image of God, then how can we just favor one type of theology from one certain group of people? If we really believe that everyone's created in the image of God, then everyone should hold a facet of God that another group may not, that another individual may not. And so if we are only looking at God through one specific lens, we must be missing out on all these other facets of God. So like I've been really challenged as I think about that. Because even I grew up most of my life in a Chinese evangelical Christian church. And, if you think about how, even Christianity was brought to China, it was colonized Christianity that was brought to China. So the Christianity that I was brought up in, even within the Chinese culture, like was a very white Jesus. I mean, the churches that we rented often had that, classic portrait of white Jesus. And that's the Jesus that I grew up with. And I really, not till recently, was like, wait, I don't think that was really what Jesus looked like if you looked at the Bible and the historical context and kind of just the geography of where he was born. Jesus wasn't white. So, but even in a Chinese culture, we were being taught a very white male theology. And again, that's not bad in of itself, but when you focus so much on it, I think we do exclude pieces of God. And the other thing I think that is dangerous and that has been harmful in only having that specific focus is that I think we haven't really learned a language of lament, because we don't know how to sit with people in suffering. When someone's suffering, we often say, oh, I'll pray for you, or God is good, God loves you. And we just quickly want people to move on based on the truths. And those are truths. We definitely believe God is good and that God loves us. But it's almost like we don't have the language to sit with people in suffering. And I think we really need to think about that and why it's so painful for us to hear these stories of African people of African descent and brown people. When they're saying they're in pain, why are we having this reaction so quickly to say, no, that's not true, or why we can't hear them in their suffering? And I think part of that could be because we haven't been given the language to be able to sit in that suffering. I mean, if you think about Job, like his friends, when he was suffering, they started off saying, we'll pray for you, God is good, God is faithful. And then as the suffering prolonged and got worse and worse, they lost the ability to be able to comprehend it. So their natural response was, it must be Job's fault. And they blamed him for his suffering, in which we know that was not a accurate assumption for what was going on. And I think likewise, we as the church in America, and I myself included, we don't like to sit in that place of suffering and sit with people in that because we just don't know how to do it. So that's kind of what I've been learning and what I'm trying to be better at understanding.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. That's a lot to unpack and think about. And particularly bringing up the white Jesus, and that the debate going on right now is very relevant and important, I think, for us to understand like how much our theology is grounded in our own identities and lenses. I think that's a great perspective. I want to follow up with you with another question specifically. I think we've all kind of watched in horror as leaders of our country, specifically our president, I'll just say it, have seeming to give leave for people to exert a certain kind of racism against Asian Americans in general, or Chinese Americans specifically, as they want to call COVID-19 by different names that indicate, China is at fault, or even Chinese people are at fault. And watching that give rise to incidents of racism, both, passive and aggressive. And I just wonder if you'd be willing to share your perspective on that and any experiences you've had as a result of that.
Well, I think obviously all my life, I think part of this is my personality, but part of it is also growing up as a minority with a very white majority culture, is that I've always felt like I don't belong, and my greatest fear was that I don't belong, and my greatest desire was to belong and feel accepted. And it really affected kind of even the way that I saw my worth and my identity in God much of the time I would pray, Lord, that God would just make me white so that I wouldn't have to carry that stress of just wanting to not feel like I don't belong. But so when I hear my president making me calling the flu the Kung flu, or blaming it on Chinese people, almost kind of giving people permission to look at me as someone different or someone threatening or someone to put blame on, it has been very hurtful. And I said earlier that I never really feared for my life as a result of being a minority growing up. But once that rhetoric came out, I did. It came out in the middle of COVID, obviously, and I had been quarantining for a bit of time before I needed to go out for groceries. And I distinctly remember myself wondering, I'm going to go out, I'm going to wear my mask, but obviously with my mask on, people can still see my eyes, they can still see my hair, and they're going to know I'm Asian. Are they going to spit at me? Am I going to get comments? Am I going to be threatened? I honestly was nervous and fearful in a way that I had never been before. And that was as a result of hearing the president make comments. And then it was also hurtful that when people made him aware that there were better ways of addressing the virus, like by its real name, that he refused to do so. So yeah, it did make me feel unsafe, and it was hurtful.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to shift over to Kathy, who's here obviously to tell a little bit of a different kind of story. Kathy, as a white woman who's grown up in a pretty white community, who's obviously very interested in and wanting to be part of this movement for racial justice, can you tell us a little bit about your story and why you're engaged and why you want to, speak out to help others be engaged?
In my paying job, I serve as the president of the local union. And I've done that for 24 years. So I've kind of grown into that job. So that gives me, several different roles to play. But what really got me on board is back in 1996, I was involved in a labor dispute with my employer. At that time, I served as the vice president of the union, and a dear friend of mine was the president. His name's Lowell, and he's a Black man. We were picketing on a sidewalk in a local town. There were about 20 of us picketing. The police in this small town were videotaping us. They felt as though we were violating some local ordinance. So we were just walking around on the sidewalk, pretty quiet, holding signs, being respectful, not even speaking out loud. Lowell was walking in front of me on the sidewalk, and he had to step off the sidewalk because somebody that was walking towards him there wasn't enough room for him to pass. So I remember vividly just watching his foot step down off the curb onto the road. And when he did, the police literally came running over to him and grabbed him and pushed him down onto the police cruiser and grabbed his arms and put his arms behind his back. And I said, "What are you doing?" I was just so angry. I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're arresting him because he stepped off the sidewalk." And I said, "That's not right." And then they turned around and arrested me. And then four of my coworkers stood up and they started complaining as well. So they were questioned. They questioned the police as well. So they were arrested. So we were all hauled off to the local little, Mayberry RFD police department. And, about 2 hours later, I was just disappointed because I was the only woman there. So I was in a cell by myself. They were kind of having a rip-roaring time next door. But when we got out 2 hours later, our cases were eventually dismissed in court because our rights are protected under the National Labor Relations Act. But it was one of those scenes that I've never forgot. That was 24 years ago. It was the first experience that I ever had with someone being treated differently because of who they were. And I've shared this story with so many different people, and it was just one of those things that opened my eyes. In my white community, in my white family, in my white town, in my white job. Subsequently, my company merged with a bigger company. We had an opportunity to be involved with a diversity council, which I took that opportunity because this is a cause that I was interested in. And I just sat and listened with tears just dripping off my face of people that were profiled, people that had good jobs, therefore they had a nice car, they were driving home from work, they were driving a company vehicle, they were pulled over because they were people of color. And I literally just was shocked, absolutely shocked. And then subsequently, I found out that those things were happening in my own backyard, in my town, in my community. So I decided that I needed to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, and to share this and to do something about it, to use my voice. My experience is what broke my heart, to be a voice for people that needed a voice. I was just really naive about it and so unaware. So I've been on this journey. There's been so many tugs at my heart, and especially with the recent social unrest and obviously injustices over the last few years. I just feel like we have to keep talking about it. We have to start doing something about it. It can't just be words, it has to be actions. My son is 20, he's in college. I have another dear friend that I work with that's a Black man. Our sons are the same age. We share our stories about what, our fears, our anxieties are about our boys. He has a completely different fear and anxiety about his son than I do. And that drives that home, that realization, like, the two of you ladies have shared, like, when somebody comes after your child, it's a different mindset. And I just think, like, every day I worry about my son in one way, but this man worries about his son in a completely different way. And we have a voice. We need to speak up. We need to be a change agent in this community, in this faith community, in this bigger community, in our home communities, our work communities, whatever it is that we're dealing with. We need to use our voice and use it as God instructed us to do that.
Right. Thank you, Kathy. Lindsay, I want to start with you, and I think Kathy's moved us in pretty well to our last section, which is, what can we do? So I think there are people who are joining us. Obviously, if someone's watching us, they're interested, right? They want to hear, they want to understand, and everybody's probably on a spectrum, right, of different places. But if someone comes to you, Lindsay, and is like, I want to engage and I want to be involved, what would you say to them? How would you direct them?
So one, I would say to listen, and to most importantly practice compassion, and listening to learn, not to fix or solve. Like Jess said, being able to sit in the sorrow. I think that's one of the hardest things. A lot of times I get people who want to, counter or rebuttal, like, was it really because of the color of your skin? And I just want to say, people of color don't go looking, to experience racism. When it happens, you're like thinking like, oh, maybe it wasn't that, maybe it was this. You're hoping that it was something else, but you can't find any other reason other than that. And, it's not something that you want to happen. So to listen, when we witness situations like the ones that we talked about, listen consciously and don't ignore it. You can start to notice them in yourself and examine why those aversions exist so that they can be corrected, and simply take heart the stories that you hear, and then to speak up and speak out and don't be a part of the problem. When you are making fun of a race and joking about it, like Elizabeth mentioned, you're being a part of the problem. So where people of color are not is in all white conversations. So don't stand for it. When someone makes a joke, you have to address it, and you can't be a part of the problem. Encourage dialogue on racism in the many circles that you find yourself. One way to do so is to ask questions in groups of people, name what happens, discuss how racism affects all of us, and find avenues and make a commitment to disrupt racism in your communities. And for us believers, racism is a scriptural issue. We are each called in Isaiah to learn to do good, seek justice, and correct oppression.
Mm.
Next, to talk to your children and the families in your children's circles about racism and other cultures. Talk to their schools to make sure that they are implementing a multicultural approach to education. Fight systemic racism by supporting Black businesses. I was reading that Black workers are overrepresented vastly in low-paying agricultural, domestic, and service jobs. They're also far more likely to be employed in normal economic situations, and especially now during this pandemic. And according to a Stanford University study, only 1% of Black-owned businesses receive loans in their first year, which is 7 times less than the percentage of white-owned businesses. So you can go to websites like WeBuyBlack.com, which is a website that helps Black businesses thrive, or you can simply search the web for Black-owned businesses near you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Jess, I'm going to put the same question to you. How would you encourage people to engage in this issue of racial injustice?
I think Lindsay's covered a great number of ways we can engage. My 2 cents to throw in here is just going back to what I shared earlier, is that I think we really need to expand our theology a little bit and be willing to read books written by theologians who are minorities. I've read a couple books recently, which I found extremely helpful. The first one is Trouble I've Seen, Changing the Way the Church Views Racism by Dr. Drew Hart. He is a Black theologian, and this book was very eye-opening for me. And this book, full disclosure, I haven't finished reading it yet, but I started and it is incredible. It's called Prophetic Lament, A Call for Justice in Troubled Times by Dr. Soon-Chan Rah, who is a Korean-American author, theologian. So yeah, if you want to start there and you want to discuss it, feel free to hit me up. You could get connected with me through Elizabeth, and I'd love to discuss it, because we're all in this together. And I think the more that we can talk about it and be willing to hear and share our experiences and perspectives and what we're learning, the more God can really come and move us to be a part of what He's doing.
Awesome, thank you. And so Kathy, I kind of put the same question to you. Obviously we have a different perspective a little bit, you and I, as white people trying to be allies in this. And obviously you've been on this journey for a while. And what can you share about what people could learn from your story and ways that you've learned maybe work and don't work in terms of engaging?
Yeah, I definitely agree that Lindsay and Jess have shared some great information. So the hard thing, my husband and I were talking about this, like, what is it? And he says, it's the hard stuff. Like, so because we're older and we've been through life a little longer, we have to deal with hard things, and we all have to deal with hard things. And sometimes it means, like Lindsay said, we have to listen to those hard conversations. And in listening to them, that's when we learn and we grow. So I think we need to know, we need to listen to these hard stories. We need to ask the hard questions. We need to hold people accountable. That's my go-to phrase now. We have to hold people accountable. People in our faith communities need to be held accountable when they don't align their thoughts and their words and their actions with what Jesus said, but yet they claim to walk with Him. I think we need to hold them accountable. I need to be held accountable, and that's what I'm asking my brothers and sisters in Christ to do for me. I've led a very sheltered life. I've also been made aware of several injustices and inequities in my own backyard. I have a voice here in all of my communities. I want to use it to share with others, to perpetuate change and promote the love of Jesus Christ. I've been so convicted by Jesus' words in Luke 12:48. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. Now it's time to be used by Him. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm praying for a humble heart, and I'm praying for His guidance, His strength, His wisdom, and His boldness to do what He's going to ask me to do.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you all for all of that, not just those really important encouragements in terms of how we can engage in action, but for sharing your stories and spending this time. I'm going to open it up for questions now. If anyone has questions that they want to put in the comment section, you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to start with one. Kathy, I think maybe you might be a good one to answer this, but Jess and Lindsay, if you guys you want to jump in too, feel free. The question is, white anger to matters of injustice and racism can be viewed as expressions of white privilege. What is a better way to respond than getting angry? So I think that question is like, when you and I see or hear about injustice, we can get like angered on behalf of people of color, but in a way that is an expression of our privilege. And so the question is like, what might be a better way we can act? And so I guess, have you kind of experienced that anger and had opportunities to redirect it? Or what would you say to that?
Definitely experienced that anger. I'm finding so much comfort in the Gospels. Jesus got mad. He had a right to get mad. Not the way that we get mad, but we have to realize that we have a voice. So in our faith communities, especially, just going back to his words, trying to find comfort in his words and aligning my comments, offering grace. When I introduced myself, I said, I'm saved by grace. I need that grace every day and need to realize that I have to turn it around and offer it to other people. So like Lindsay shared, we need to listen because there's a reason why people respond the way they do. So we can't come down with the hammer every time. We have to listen. Why is it that they're feeling that way? Have they had their own experiences? And I think that's that listening part, and not listening to respond, listening to learn. And that's a big difference, because I'm a listening to respond person, like collecting my thoughts, like how am I going to respond to that in retaliation with my words or my actions or whatever, but listening to learn, I think that's a big piece of it.
That's great. Yeah, that's important. Jess or Lindsay, do you have anything you want to add to that about this idea of sort of white anger being a manifestation of white privilege, and how people can maybe deal with that? I don't know if they're asking in their own life or ways in which they've seen it.
I agree with what Kathy said. And I think I mentioned before that where people of color are not is in all white conversations. And I think in those instances, you are, the voice. And, we're all brothers and sisters. And so my struggle should be your struggle. And, I'm just speaking for myself. I appreciate the empathy and the anger. So yeah, I agree with Kathy.
I think one way that I've been challenged as I think about that is just that we really need to seek God's heart, I think, in light of racism and what's going on. So I think, one, it's okay to have anger, because these are things that God is also angry about. But if we really ask for the whole of God's heart is also breaking over what is happening. It's not just anger. He is lamenting it. He is weeping over what he sees and how we are treating one another. And God is all inclusive, just like we're saying that God is including these people who have been excluded, marginalized, and on the underside. He also, whether we want to believe it or not, loves the oppressor. So we need to be patient and know that everyone's on this journey. And if our heart breaks the way that God's heart breaks, we also want the people who are guilty or who are doing these awful things that we see folded into his grace and folded into his love and folded into his community and the unity of the body. So it's not good enough just to be angry and dismiss those people who we see as doing harmful things. But we need to want to invite them into, and that takes time. I'll share something personal. Right after George Floyd was killed, murdered, I woke up that next day and I was about to start my quiet time, and I opened up my phone to Facebook, and I was reading all the back and forth that was going on surrounding the issue, and literally my heart just broke and I started to weep, and I really felt like God was giving me his heart for what was going on. And And as I try to do my quiet time, I said, God, I have nothing to pray. I have no words. Like all I can do is just cry. I'm just going to crawl into your lap and cry because this is all I can literally do. And I felt the Spirit just give me this invitation and saying, you know, you can sit in my lap, but I'm also inviting you to something in this place. I'm inviting you into the messy. It's not going to be pretty, and it's going to be difficult, and it's the wilderness, and it's not what you like, things all neat and perfect and like kumbaya, everybody happy, but that's not where I'm inviting you. I'm inviting you into the messy, because this is where I'm going to have freedom born for both the oppressor and the oppressed. So, so just, I invite you as well, I extend that invitation of the Spirit to just be willing to sit in that messiness and engage and be patient and love and feel the hurt and feel the anger, but not just dismiss people because of it, because that's not God's end plan. He wants us all to come along, and it's going to be a long, difficult process, but we need to be faithful to what he's calling us to, and in our own freedom, our own healing is wrapped up in that, even though it's messy. That's where our own freedom is going to come.
Thank you. Thank you. Lindsay, I'm going to direct this next one to you, but obviously anyone can respond. But how do you deal with someone who dismisses your life experiences with racism?
Dismissing by, because there's several ways. Is that just the question that they ask? Because there's several ways. Sometimes people dismiss it by what I try to call misguided empathy, by trying to share an experience that's not quite racism, but they share an experience, they have experience to try to relate. So in that way, or just by negating that the experience happened. So I guess I'll answer in both ways, because it wasn't from you, so you don't know. Okay. I would say, and I love how Steve Burton said this, but responding out of love. And by trying to understand that for a person who is not of color, especially like if you're a white male who might not have ever experienced any kind of discrimination or racism, to try to understand that they really may not get it. Mm-hmm. As hard as it is coming from a person of color, to say, it's up. It might be up to you to try to understand where that person is coming from, but I think you have to, in order for them to be able to understand your situation or your experience. And then if it's an instance where you're diminishing the experience of racism by trying to share an experience of your own that's not quite racism. For instance, we just talked last night in a group where someone was replacing the word Black in a story with lesbian. And it was an effort to try to relate. So I get where they were coming from. They were really trying to relate, but it also diminishes the fact that Black people have been marginalized. So I think, like Jess said, we just have to find a way to be able to hear people's story and learn a language of lament and be able to sit in the sorrow, which is extremely hard and awkward for people. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you kind of answering both of those questions, because I think when you're talking about this idea of someone trying to sort of relate, which is a human tendency, right? It does negate the experience. And I think, Kathy, you had talked about listening to listen as opposed to listening to respond. And I think it connects with that too. Like, we need to learn to just listen. And so I really appreciate that response. That's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, as believers, how should we act when it comes to racism, especially if we want to show love to others? And I feel like you guys have been kind of addressing this, But does anyone want to kind of take that one specifically with, here's what it might look like?
I'll start if you guys want to add. I just, like Z Burton said, responding out of love, and remember that we are representing Christ. So just simply by listening and responding out of love.
That's great, thank you.
The greatest commandments that Jesus left us with was love God and love others. It's pretty simple. We complicate it over and over again. So I think it's always just recentering. Am I loving God in my comments, in my listening, in my facial expressions, in my actions? Am I loving others? Is that reflective in me? And if I'm not, then again, check our own heart at that point. But I think it's just, again, we just so complicate it, but it's pretty simple. Love God and love others. And we just have to keep, trying to center around that.
And just to add on, I think just to ask for humility, I think, because oftentimes I think, most people, especially in the church, aren't blatant racists, so I think we almost give ourselves a pass. Well, yeah, of course, I wouldn't call anyone the N-word, so, I'm good. But sometimes there are things that, we just say or do that are hurtful and are implicitly racist that we don't realize. So when someone says, hey, that was offensive to me, instead of saying, no, but I didn't mean it like that, and getting defensive about it, just hear it and just say, I'm so sorry, tell me more of, I want to understand so they don't do that again, and that's hard for me, I need a lot of prayer for that. But I think it's our ego just to defend ourselves, especially when our intentions are good. But I think in this moment it's really important to, despite our good intentions, to hear how we may have caused harm and be willing to change.
Great, thank you. Could someone comment on the all lives matter phrase? And this person saying, I see lots of people saying this who naively think this is bringing people together. So, all lives matter came out years ago in response to Black Lives Matter, and how can we respond to that and help people understand how that's not a unifying phrase?
So I'll start, and if you guys want to add, but of course, all lives matter is how I want to respond, but all lives are not being killed. All lives are not in danger. Black lives are the only ones who are in danger. And so it's the Black Lives Matter movement is particularly important because it says our lives matter as well. Mm-hmm. And it's not saying our lives are the only lives that matter. It's just saying that our lives matter.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Wanted to add the story of the Good Samaritan is a good example of just being in that moment, seeing what the need is and addressing that need. And when we say Black lives are important, all lives matter, we're not addressing that need. We're not being empathetic. We're not being tuned in. We're not being loving and caring and kind to the situation. And you can only equate it to if you've been through a personal tragedy in your life that you've lost somebody that's important to you and you're sharing that. And somebody says, well, I feel bad for you, but look what happened to me. That doesn't make you feel any better. It's that listening again, to listen and to love and to respond, not to respond, but to listen and to love and to learn, but just in allowing that person that validation of that person's feelings and those opinions. And I heard that so much, all lives matter, because I'm white, right? So I have no business saying Black Lives Matter. And I heard that a lot. And that was a very hard thing because it was that anger that I wanted to react in that way, just being angry. But you know what? That's not how you respond to somebody that's dealing with a hard situation.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we have almost reached the end. So I just want to do a few things to wrap us up. First of all, I want to thank you guys for agreeing to do this in the first place. You were all very busy. You have a lot going on in your lives, and just that you agreed to set aside this time. And then that you just were vulnerable with your stories, and just shared who you are with us so that we can learn and grow. And I just sincerely appreciate it, you know, as a friend, but just also as someone who's trying to engage in this conversation personally and facilitate the engagement of others. It was just so wonderful to hear from all of you. And I'm just so grateful for your willingness to do that. So thank you. And thank you to everyone on Facebook who's joining us. I'm sorry that we had some glitches. If you weren't able to start at the beginning, we did record it and we will put it up. There were just some issues with some people trying to hijack the conversation and charge people for it. So we were really trying to take that down. And so I'm sorry if that caused confusion for anyone. I just want to say that, but we will make the recording available. So people will be able to see the conversation from beginning to end. And as we talked in the end of our scripted discussion about next steps, I want to provide a few of those. And I think I have one of my board members is kind of monitoring the Facebook comments, and she's going to throw up some of these links. Again, technical difficulties. If that doesn't happen, I will throw up the links once I log off of Zoom with these wonderful women. So first there's going to be a reading list. It's put out by Sojourners. There's a lot of wonderful reading lists going around. This isn't the only one, but this is a list of books that could help us engage in these topics. There's some really wonderful books. I certainly haven't read them all, but I've read a number of them enough to be able to recommend this list as one that is a great first, second, third, fourth, fifth step in this journey. The next thing is some links to some organizations. Again, there are so many organizations engaging in this work. That is one of the wonderful things that's going on right now, but there's a few that we're just more familiar with and would encourage support of. They can help you learn, but they can also help direct your advocacy. So as you look to take some tangible steps, these organizations provide ways for you to engage in the work of racial justice. The next thing that's going up is going to be a link to Boston Faith and Justice's page. And that's where you can get connected with our Lazarus at the Gate Bible study, which is just something that I love and think is a great next step to take because it encouraged participants. Oh, and Kathy has done it. She gives it a thumbs up. It encourages participants to think about their own personal choices, specifically their economic choices and how we can use our resources. And so thinking about this work of racial justice, this long work, examining our own personal choices and how they do or do not reflect the word of God, I think is a really important step. And this study, I think gently but radically helps us to do that in the context of community. So I would encourage you to look at that. And then finally, for those of us in Massachusetts, the last link is to a page that will help you understand a bill that's before the Mass legislature right now, which is for some pretty substantial police reform. And I know there was going to be a debate at the House at 11 today, and I have not followed it since this morning. So I don't know where it stands now, but this page should give you updates, not only to help you understand this reform bill, why it's needed and what's in it, but also how you can get involved in helping make it come to pass before the end of the legislative session, July 31st. So those are some things, some next steps, some ways you can engage. Also, obviously, you can connect with the Boston Faith and Justice Network. This is a work we're continuing to learn how to engage in and want to be a facilitator for that. So you can go to our website, our Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, all the things. And we would love to be connected and just help people engage in this work. And that is all we have for tonight. This was our first in our series of uncomfortable conversations. We will have another one in September, which will talk about economic injustice and in general economic injustice and the large income disparities in this country. I'm sorry, there's a fruit fly in here. That's why I'm doing this. But the large income gaps in this country, and also in that how the racial component of economic disparities and income disparities in this region and in this country. And so we're going to have a panel that will talk about that in September. So stay connected with us. And once we have more information on the whens and the whos, we will put that up. So once again, I want to say thank you to everyone, to the wonderful panel, to everyone who took time out of their night to learn and grow with us. And hopefully we will be connecting in different ways and forming this community that is working for real sustainable change for racial justice. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thanks.